In the previous episode, the protagonist effortlessly fulfilled the second condition, causing the godlike influencer of their tale to lose some of his control over the story. Following this shift, Killian, intrigued and eager to learn more about her, extended an invitation to the opera and they both enjoyed it. Now, as the story continues, Killian sees the protagonist in a new light. Unbeknownst to him, his feelings of love are quietly unfolding, catching even himself off guard. "Why are you looking at me like that, Killian?" she asks, tilting her head in mild amusement. Killian replies, "If you're not too tired, Edith, would you care to join me for a stroll through the streets?" And the streets outside greet them with a breathtaking view. Twilight paints the sky in hues of pink, purple, and gold, while the quiet murmur of city life creates a serene yet lively atmosphere. As they walk, hand in hand, the protagonist notices a little girl selling flowers by the roadside. She halts and gently tells Killian to wait. Approaching the child, she inquires about the price of the entire basket of flowers. Before she can pay, Killian steps forward without a word, handing the money to the astonished girl. The protagonist looks at him, surprise lighting her features, while the little flower seller's eyes widen with awe at his generosity. "You must be the only woman in the kingdom trying to buy herself flowers when her husband is right next to her," Killian remarks with a faint smile. The protagonist's lips curve into a cheerful grin. "I've never received anything like this before," she admits. Killian looks slightly sheepish, his confidence wavering. "I'm sure these wilted flowers aren't what you deserve. They'd at least have been fresher this morning." She gazes at the bouquet, her expression tender yet tinged with sadness. Memories of her past life surface. "In my past life, my parents barely had enough for food, and my ex-boyfriend never bought me anything. I imagine people must have sent flowers to Edith to gain her favor, but she probably never even touched them. Be it my past or present life, these are the first flowers I've ever received. I never thought it would mean so much." Moved, Killian suggests they explore the city further. She agrees, and together, they savor the magical evening. As the protagonist reflects on the moment, she thinks, all of this, the streets, the square, must have been crafted for the original protagonists of the story. And yet, I'm here, sharing it with Killian. Is it because I fulfilled the conditions for level 2? If Killian's feelings are changing because of this, what happens if I fulfill the conditions for level 3? Will we finally be free of this story's grip? Could we forge our own happiness, like the unnamed people who were never bound by the original plot? The day after night, under a sky full of stars and a full moon, Killian walked alone through Rudwick Hall. His thoughts were all about Edith. Killian, thinking, when I invited her to the opera, I thought she might find it boring. I imagined she'd been to dozens before with other men. But then, she cried like a child during Odletha's performance, as if it was her first time seeing anything like it. And flowers, who would have thought she'd never received them before? It makes me happier than it should. What's happening to me?" His thoughts were interrupted when a voice called out, "Rice! Killian! You look distracted. Are you all right?" Killian, snapping out of his thought. "I'm fine, Rice. Did something happen?" Rice, hesitant. "I heard something troubling. A maid said she saw Edith dipping threads in poison. But that maid disappeared today, even though her things are still here. Cliff has been searching for her all day." Killian, frowning. "Now? Why didn't she come forward earlier? How did Cliff find out?" Rice. "I don't know, but..." Killian, "It can't be true, right? Edith wouldn't do that." "I don't believe it." Killian, firmly. "Of course not." Just then, Killian heard a strange voice whispering that Edith was dangerous, not to be trusted. He froze, his eyes darting around. "Killian, did you hear that voice?" Rice, confused. "What voice?" Killian, "Never mind. Listen, you don't need to worry. Edith has no reason to harm you." Killian's mind worked quickly as he spoke. "Killian, if Count Reigelhoff wanted to hurt someone, it wouldn't be you." "And jealousy?" "Edith doesn't crave my attention, if anything, she avoids it. This feels like someone set it up. I'll need to look into the other maids." Rice, alarm. "There's no need for that. I wasn't trying to make things worse." Killian, placing his coat over her shoulders. "It's cold. Take care of yourself. And if Cliff tries to act on his own about Edith, let me know. Don't let him realize, though. He might try to cover it up." Rice nodded, gripping the coat tightly. As Killian turned to leave, she called out. Killian, pausing. "What is it?" Rice, with a small smile. It's nothing. Good night, Killian. 3 days later, the morning sun streams through the windows of Rudwick Manor as Killian and the protagonist sit at the dining table. I brought strawberry cakes from Peridot, Killian says with a faint smile. I had the servants prepare them for dessert. I hope you'll like them. The protagonist, clearly taken aback, studies him. Why has he been with me every day since our date? Didn't it answer all his questions? What could he be scheming now? Killian, she begins hesitantly. Didn't you say you were busy today? He looks at her with mild amusement. I should have greeted you earlier. I'm home, my lady. Her brow furrows. I'm not joking, Killian. What's gotten into you? For the past 3 days, we've shared every meal together. We're married, he replies matter-of-factly. What's so strange about that? She blinks in surprise. Pardon me. Killian sighs softly. I know I've made many missteps. But if it's all right with you, Edith, I'd like to get to know you better. She freezes, his words catching her off guard. He continues, his voice earnest. Although you're still a key suspect in the recent incidents, I'm becoming more convinced of your innocence. Above all, I hope you aren't the culprit. Her chest tightens, a swell of emotions rising within her. Thank you, Killian. You shouldn't thank me, he says, his tone almost apologetic. I should be the one apologizing. I've wronged you in so many ways. That's why I want to spend more time with you. Would that be all right? Her cheeks flush, the warmth of his sincerity overwhelming her. Even more time than we already spend together? She asks, trying to mask her flustered state. He nods. To truly know someone, you need to spend time with them. I want to learn everything about you. What you like, what you dislike, all your little habits. I don't want to miss a single thing about you, Edith. She stares at him, her face burning red. You don't need to be so obsessive to get to know me better. Hence, the current observation period starts to know about the protagonist. At first, I thought I would be uncomfortable having Killian watching and evaluating me. Reality, it felt more comfortable and natural than expected. It felt like one of the walls between us has crumbled. Killian, let me bring something warmer, he said suddenly, as though deciding on a whim. She frowned. Killian, it's only late summer. I don't want you catching a cold and becoming a bother, he replied matter-of-factly. Don't worry. Even if I caught a cold, I wouldn't let anyone know. Don't be ridiculous, Killian said firmly. I won't let you get away with it if you hide an illness from me again, he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. But didn't you just say I'd be a bother? She teased, her brow arched. He sighed, his expression softening. I misspoke. I'm sorry. Did I offend you? She hadn't expected the apology, nor the earnest look in his eyes. As they sat in the garden, their quiet exchange did not go unnoticed. Rice, seated nearby with Cliff, observed them with an approving smile. The protagonist felt Killian's gaze linger on her longer than usual, and when she looked up at him, expecting some sort of reserved sadness, she was shocked to see his confidence instead, a smile that was both uncharacteristic and disarming. Her heart skipped a beat, but her mind scrambled for explanations. Is he doing this to make Rice jealous? She wondered. Deciding to play along, she leaned in and held his gaze, her expression softening into something more deliberate. The intensity of her look caught Killian off guard, and for the briefest moment, his cheeks flushed. The spell was broken when Cliff's voice rang out. I understand you're doting on your wife, brother, but Rice has been waiting to speak to you. Don't you think you're being rude? The protagonist's thoughts flickered. This is strange. In the story I know, Cliff always competed with Killian. Why isn't he acting that way now? Rice cleared her throat, speaking directly to Killian. Oh, it's nothing. I received word from the cobbler that the shoes were ready. Remember? You asked me to go together before. I don't need to buy anything in particular, but I know you like that shop. At her words, the protagonist felt an unfamiliar pang. Jealousy? Annoyance? She wasn't sure, but the emotion stirred uncomfortably in her chest. Killian, however, turned to her as though seeking permission. Would you mind? He asked gently. Feigning distraction, she didn't answer. Rice looked disappointed but covered it with a small smile. It's fine, she said. I'll go with Cliff instead. But Killian wasn't convinced. I can make time for you, he offered. Rice brightened, but Cliff interjected with a polite refusal. I'm afraid I'll be busy with Father and Edith preparing for the Emperor's visit. I won't have time for other excursions. The protagonist frowned, her thoughts racing. Why is Cliff providing Killian and Rice an opportunity to spend time together? Shouldn't he be preventing this? The moment passed without further incident, but her unease deepened. Later that day, as she strolled through the manor's halls, she stumbled upon Damien Sinclair in conversation with Duke Rudwick. Damien's attention shifted, and when his gaze landed on her, he greeted her with a startling slip of the tongue. Lady Edith Rigelhoff, he said, using her maiden name. Killian stiffened immediately, stepping between them. His voice was cold, his words sharper than the protagonist had ever heard. You've made a mistake. She is Edith Rudwick now. Before she could react, Killian ushered her inside, leaving her alone with her swirling thoughts. That evening, at the dinner table, he barely spoke. Yet, as he excused himself early, he turned at the door, his hand brushing against her hair. His voice, low and almost hesitant, broke the silence. I like it. Your fragrance. The next morning, the protagonist sat quietly at a fine cafe. Her maid, Anna, kept her company. The peaceful ambience was suddenly disrupted when Anna broke the silence with a startling question. My lady, do you not love young Master Killian? The protagonist froze, the question hitting her like a thunderbolt. She had come here to escape her complicated reality, not to delve into the intricacies of her marriage. Noticing her startled reaction, Anna quickly backtracked. Please forgive me, my lady. I spoke out of line, Anna said, bowing her head apologetically. The protagonist smiled faintly and reassured her. No, Anna. I asked you to start a conversation. I'm simply surprised. What made you ask something like that? Anna hesitated before explaining. I heard the young master is planning to go to La Belle Marie Avenue with Miss Rice. Even if it's just for errands, that street is famous as a date destination. And, well, you two have seemed closer lately, so I thought. Her voice trailed off, but the underlying concern was clear. Anna, who once seemed loyal to the Rudwick family alone, now appeared genuinely worried for her. This shift in allegiance felt strange but oddly comforting. Thank you, Anna, the protagonist said softly, her words gentle. But I'm fine. Truly, I couldn't ask for anything more. That morning, she had quietly sold off her dresses, jewelry, and anything of value she had brought into the Rudwick household. Her plan to leave had begun to take shape. No matter how kind Killian is, no matter how much I've come to rely on his warmth, I cannot trust him. I cannot trust anyone. Her thoughts drifted to her past. To a time when her family, too poor to pay for her medical care, had deemed her survival a burden not worth carrying. Their betrayal had taught her that asking for help always came at a cost. And she would never pay that price again. In the end, she resolved, she could only trust herself. Later that day, back at the Rudwick Manor, Killian was pacing, clearly agitated. He had been looking for the protagonists all over the mansion. When they finally crossed paths, his expression was a mixture of concern and frustration. Why did you sell your dresses and jewelry? He asked sharply, his tone both demanding and worried. The protagonist blinked, startled by his question. All of them? No. I just got rid of the ones I didn't need. Killian's eyes narrowed. Don't you understand how it looks when a married woman suddenly sells her belongings? Her thoughts began to spin. Had her actions tarnished the Rudwick reputation? It wouldn't have been the first time something small she did was misinterpreted by society. Even before her marriage, her refusal to attend parties had sparked rumors that the Rudwicks were controlling her. It seemed no matter how hard she tried to avoid attention, Edith Rigelhoff, now Edith Rudwick, remained at the center of gossip. I'm sorry, she said after a pause. I didn't think that far ahead. I don't have much cash aside from the dowry I brought with me. Killian's reaction shifted to one of misunderstanding. His face hardened, and his voice rose slightly. The allowance we provide isn't enough for you, is it? That's why you've resorted to this. Her eyes widened in surprise. Allowance? She had no idea the Rudwicks even offered her one. His voice cracked with emotion as he continued, Why don't you ever tell me anything? You've always been like this. Even when your father's maid mistreated you, even when you drank that poison in your already weakened state, you never said a word. Don't you trust me to take care of you? Before she could react, Killian's hand reached out, his fingers gently brushing against her cheek. The warmth of his touch startled her, and for a brief moment, she was frozen, her mind awash with conflicting emotions. An old memory flashed through her mind, Sophia's chilling warning. If the Rudwicks realize the Reigelhofs don't care about you, Killian Rudwick will rejoice and toss you out the door without a second thought. The weight of those words pulled her back to reality. She gently removed Killian's hand from her face, her voice calm but firm. There are things I can't tell you, Killian. His gaze darkened, and his voice turned cold. Then that means I can't trust your words entirely. You should know that. The tension in the room was palpable. After a heavy pause, Killian exhaled sharply. Just let it be. I'll buy back everything you sold. Her eyes widened. Please, don't. I really don't need any of it. Killian, she protested. It's a waste of money. But he was already leaving the room, his mind made up. An hour later, the protagonist walking through the royal palace alongside Cliff. She had been trying to piece together his motives since they left the manor. His enigmatic behavior unsettled her. Cliff broke the silence with a sly smile. That suspicious look of yours could make even me nervous. Startled, she apologized. Ah, forgive me. I suppose I just don't know you well enough yet. His smile widened, though it didn't reach his eyes. True enough. I've kept my distance, haven't I? Though, it seems you and Killian have been getting along better lately. Only for the past few days, she admitted. Who knows what the future holds? Cliff chuckled darkly. Right. His interest in you will fade soon. Compared to the time he's spent with Rice, you're insignificant. Her jaw clenched, and she forced herself to maintain a polite smile. Is he looking for a fight? Cliff continued, unfazed by her reaction. Still, I hope Killian's affections remain fixed on you. Our current interests align, don't they? She tilted her head, feigning confusion. I'm not sure what you mean. He smirked. No need to play coy. It's simple. You want Killian. I want Rice. It works for both of us to keep our partners where they belong. Her composure cracked slightly. I think you misunderstand. While I may be Killian's wife, I have no intention of forcing his affections. Cliff's expression faltered, and his confidence wavered. You say that now. But will you say the same if Killian goes back to the way he was before? A chill ran through her as she considered the possibility. What are you trying to say? Cliff's smile returned, this time sharper. Killian enjoys sailing. Every summer, the first thing he does is take his yacht out on the lake. Before you married, he and Rice spent hours out there together. But since your arrival, he hasn't set foot on it. And, of course, there's his love for the arts, especially paintings. Cliff advised, no matter what, make sure to compliment him often. He's always had an inferiority complex towards me. After speaking, Cliff glanced at the protagonist, waiting for her reaction. What he didn't expect was the expression on her face, her clenched fists and the aggressive glare in her eyes. The protagonist's thoughts raced. When did the two brothers become so hostile? In the original novel, they competed for the same woman's heart, sure, but they were still brothers. I thought they'd care for each other, even if they weren't particularly close. As they walked, their destination came into view. Cliff interrupted her thoughts by asking another question. By the way, do you know a maid named Sabina? The protagonist quickly denied any connection to someone by that name. Cliff nodded, turning to leave. All right then. Enjoy your time with Her Highness, he said, bidding her farewell. Moments later, a maid approached and curtly announced, the princess is waiting. The protagonist followed the maid. The scene shifted to the stables, where Princess Katrin awaited. The princess glanced at the protagonist as she entered. Edith Rudwick, at your service, Your Highness, the protagonist greeted, curtsying slightly. Princess Katrin studied her with a strange expression, her gaze lingering a moment too long. I hear you've never been on a horse, Katrin remarked. But you seem quite at ease in trousers. Of course, the protagonist thought. I wore them every day in my previous life. My body feels comfortable in them, but my heart does not. Well, Katrin continued, turning briskly. Follow me. What followed was hours of grueling riding lessons. The protagonist, struggling to keep up, silently wondered, is she taking revenge for my sassy attitude last time? Her overactive imagination conjured an exaggerated image of Princess Katrin towering over her like a vengeful deity, ready to strike her down. Just kill me already, she thought desperately. I can't take this any longer. Sensing the protagonist's discomfort, Katrin finally spoke. Don't look at me like that, I'm not doing this because I want to. It was Killian's idea. What? Killian. The protagonist blurted in surprise. Katrin sighed, as if remembering something particularly absurd. I didn't believe it at first either. Killian isn't the type to joke about such things. When he asked to speak with me privately, even without the Duke or his brother present, I wondered what on earth it could be about. The narrative transitioned to the past, revealing Killian's conversation with Katrin. You want me to teach Edith Rudwick how to ride? Katrin had asked, raising an eyebrow. She's not a Reigelhoff anymore, Killian corrected her firmly. She's Edith Rudwick now. And yes, I need you to teach her. As you know, the territory I'll be granted is not as developed as the capital. If she relies solely on carriages, the first snowstorm will trap her indoors. I meant to teach her myself, but she doesn't seem keen on the idea. Killian's voice softened. That only left you. You're the only person I can trust with this. Katrin crossed her arms, skeptical. I still don't understand. Why are you going so far for her? I've heard the rumors. Didn't you marry her solely to secure a political alliance? Once the current situation is resolved, you can simply annul the marriage. Killian's expression darkened, anger flashing in his eyes. Who said that? My father? Cliff? Or is that just the nonsense circulating in the social scene? He shook his head, his disappointment palpable. I expected better from you, Katrin. I thought you wouldn't fall for baseless rumors. Katrin didn't back down. Are you telling me the same story she did? This isn't about gossip. Until a month ago, Edith was a Reigelhoff. Are you really going to ignore their history of evil deeds? Can you truly claim she has nothing to do with them? Killian's voice was firm yet measured. It might be hard to believe, but Edith's values couldn't be more different from her family's. I can't share the details yet, so I won't ask you to trust me blindly. But if Edith has told you similar things, I urge you to get to know her for yourself. Reserve your judgment until then. The story returned to the present. Katrin sighed, her tone softer as she addressed the protagonist. You know, I hate to admit it, but Killian and you were right. You're not the kind of person who'd fake an interest in horses just to please me. The idea that you're some villainous snake, as the social scene paints you, is laughable. Her gaze softened with regret. I owe you an apology. I believed the worst of you and said hurtful things without understanding the truth. You told me you respected me, and I responded with cruelty. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but will you accept my apology? Overwhelmed with emotion, the protagonist's eyes filled with tears. Katrin, noticing this, smiled faintly, relieved by the response. The narrative transitioned through the marketplace together. Killian and Rice were walking through the market. Rice stopped in front of a dress shop, only to find it closed. I thought you came to pick up shoes today, Killian remarked. We may have left later than planned, but we still arrived in time for the cobbler. Did you want something from this shop? Rice hesitated, disappointment evident in her eyes. Not really, she muttered. At the cobbler's, Killian knelt down to help her try on a pair of sandals. You know, Rice, he said with a soft smile, they say great shoes will take you to great places. But even as he spoke, his thoughts wandered to the protagonist, her radiant smile, the way she marveled at the bustling streets during their time together at the opera. I can't remember a single thing I bought her that would last, he thought, his chest tightening. Back at Rudwick Manor, Cliff passed by the protagonist's slightly ajar bedroom door and saw Killian presenting her with gifts. Her face lit up with happiness, a sight that brought a smirk to Cliff's lips. Later, he found himself in Rice's room. She looked somber, lost in thought despite the many gifts Killian had given her earlier that day. Killian tried hard today, didn't he? Cliff teased. Rice shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not like that. He's completely devoted to her. I'm just bothering him. Cliff stepped closer, his smile tinged with curiosity. Tell me, Rice, do you care about Killian that much? Rice blinked, as if coming back to her senses, and replied softly, I care about both you and Killian. But I know there's nothing I can really do for either of you. Cliff's eyes narrowed as he studied her. You know that's not what I'm talking about. Can't I be the only one for you? I want you to trust me completely, to rely on me alone, not Killian. Yet right now, you seem so affected by him. Rice's expression shifted, her demeanor taking on the subtle sharpness of a cunning fox. She lifted her chin with a feigned smile and said, You think I'm affected by him? Why would I be? With a light laugh, she continued, I'm perfectly fine, Cliff. I was just Not expecting my outing to be so exhausting, that's all. Changing the subject, she asked, "How was your day?" Cliff's lips curved into a smirk. "Are you really curious about me?" "Of course," Rice replied, her voice honeyed. "I kept thinking of you while I was out. I wished I'd gone out with you instead of Killian." Yet her words were a lie. All day, jealousy had burned inside her as she watched Killian dote on Edith. Every time he spoke about her or bought her something, the pang of envy grew sharper. Cliff nodded knowingly, as if her words confirmed something he already suspected. "Interesting," he said. "I spoke with Edith earlier today. I told her that Killian hasn't had the chance to take the yacht out this summer." Rice's eyes widened in surprise. "Why would you mention the yacht to Edith out of nowhere?" Cliff caught the flicker of emotion in her eyes and stepped closer, his movements deliberate. He reached out, his fingers brushing through her hair before gripping it gently but firmly. Holding her gaze, he leaned in, his voice low and intimate. "I only exist for you, Rice," he whispered, his tone both a promise and a claim. "No matter the cost, I'll give you everything you desire. You're my spring goddess." The room grew so quiet that the faint sound of their heartbeats seemed to echo. Rice lowered her gaze, gathering her courage before breaking the heavy silence. "I want," she began hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly. "I only want you to have eyes for me, Cliff." A slow, unsettling smile spread across Cliff's face, one that bordered on madness and sent a chill down the spine. "Even more than now?" he asked, his voice laced with a dangerous edge. "That might be risky for you, Rice." The way he spoke made her shiver as if his obsession was a storm she might not be able to weather. A few days later, the protagonist sat across from Killian, enjoying a delicate pastry as their conversation drifted to lighter topics. "We didn't visit the lake this summer," she said, her voice casual but her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "The weather has been perfect for sailing." Killian tilted his head, a trace of surprise flickering across his face. "Do you enjoy sailing?" The protagonist paused for a moment, her thoughts racing. Well, who wouldn't enjoy sailing on a yacht on a sunny day like this? Despite her initial reservations about taking Cliff's advice, she decided to bring up the yacht as a test to gauge Killian's reaction. In her previous life, the idea of sailing was as distant as a dream, something for others to enjoy, while she could only imagine. But now, here she was, throwing the thought out into the open. "I've been thinking about Cliff's comment, so I thought I'd mention it." Killian's gaze softened as a small smile tugged at his lips. "If the weather is fair tomorrow, will you join me on the yacht?" The protagonist couldn't hide her happiness at his response. Her cheeks flushed, and a smile spread wide across her face as Killian immediately called Anna to contact Samuel and prepare the yacht for the next day. The following morning, as the protagonist was heading to the lake, she unexpectedly bumped into Rice. "Are you going somewhere, Edith?" Rice asked, her voice carrying a curious edge. The protagonist replied cheerfully, "Yes, Killian and I are going to the lake." Rice's eyes lit up with a peculiar mix of excitement and something harder to define. Will you two sail on his yacht, then?" The protagonist nodded. "Yes, we will." Rice chuckled softly, her tone almost teasing. "His yacht is so beautiful. Killian used to take me every year. I loved sailing with him. Last time, we even fished. Will you go fishing today?" The protagonist felt an awkward twinge, unsure why Rice was sharing such personal memories. But then it clicked. Rice was likely trying to subtly remind her of her history with Killian. Rice smiled warmly, her tone shifting. "I'm so happy for you, Edith. It's nice to see you and Killian spending more time together." The protagonist kept her expression calm, returning Rice's words with polite gratitude. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that Rice's interest wasn't entirely innocent. Their conversation was interrupted by Killian's arrival. He apologized to the protagonist for being late and greeted Rice briefly before the latter left, wishing them a pleasant day. The scene shifted to the lake, where the protagonist stood on Killian's yacht. The vast, glittering water stretched endlessly, sunlight dancing across the waves, making everything feel like a dream. She held onto the railing, her hair caught in the breeze, her eyes filled with wonder and joy. Killian leaned against the mast, watching her with an intensity that could only be described as love. "Don't lean too far over the railing," Killian warned gently, striding toward her. "You might hurt yourself." Without hesitation, he slipped off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, his touch lingering. The protagonist turned to meet his gaze, and in that moment, she felt it, the warmth of love, not just from his jacket but from the tenderness in his eyes. She smiled, and time seemed to pause as the breeze carried them closer to one another. "What are you doing?" Killian asked, his voice low and teasing, as the protagonist closed her eyes and leaned toward him. "Don't kill the mood," she murmured with a hint of mischief. "Just do it." Killian's brow arched. "Just do what?" She smirked, her voice soft but playful. "You have a woman in your arms with her eyes closed. How could you not know what to do?" Killian didn't waste a second. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her close until no space was left between them. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, one that left them both breathless. When they pulled back, their foreheads rested together, cheeks flushed, eyes locked. Killian's lips curved into a rare, tender smile before he leaned in again, placing a gentle kiss on her cheek. The protagonist let out a soft giggle, her heart soaring. The yacht rocked gently on the shimmering turquoise waters, the sun casting an ethereal glow across the lake. She leaned against Killian, her mind a tangle of emotions. "I couldn't have imagined this moment, but what happens next?" For now, though, she allowed herself to simply enjoy the warmth of his embrace and the beauty of the present.
Hey, if you enjoyed this content and made it to the end of the video, click that subscribe button and be part of our adventure.